We know the stories. We teach them in schools, we inscribe them in monuments, we say, never again, with solemn conviction. And yet, again and again, humanity stumbles back into the same patterns. Wars erupt where peace was promised. Economies collapse under greed and short-sightedness. Democracies fall to the very authoritarian temptations they once overthrew. Climate disasters rage while leaders echo the same denials their predecessors made decades ago. The haunting truth is this: knowing better has never been enough to stop us from repeating mistakes. Humanity has a strange affliction, a kind of collective amnesia. The psychology behind this is both fascinating and troubling. Unlike an individual forgetting where they left their keys, collective amnesia is about entire societies losing grip on hard-earned lessons. It isn't that the information disappears, the history books remain, the documentaries roll, the survivors tell their stories, but memory fades at the collective level because remembering is uncomfortable. It threatens identity. It slows the momentum of progress. It demands responsibility. And so, in subtle ways, cultures forget. We sand down the rough edges of the past, polish myths in place of messy truths, and convince ourselves that this time will be different. Yet time and again, it isn't. Psychologists call this selective memory, motivated forgetting, cognitive dissonance. Sociologists frame it as identity preservation, the way groups shield themselves from painful truths that contradict their self-image. The French philosopher Ernest Renan once said, "Forgetting, I would even go so far as to say historical error, is a crucial factor in the creation of a nation." In other words, amnesia is not a bug, it is a feature of collective life. And therein lies the danger. History shows this with brutal clarity. Take the First World War, hailed as the war to end all wars. Million dead, empire dissolved, economy shattered. The horrors were supposed to inoculate humanity against repeating them. But barely 2 decades later, nationalism surged again. Scapegoats were found, and the world descended into an even bloodier conflict. Collective memory had been rewritten in that short span. The stories of futility were replaced with stories of betrayal, humiliation, and unfinished business. For Germany, the Treaty of Versailles became not a warning against militarism, but a grievance to avenge. For others, the dream of stability outweighed the vigilance required to protect it. Within a generation, the lesson was gone. Why? Because memory is fragile. Studies in psychology show that even at the individual level, memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction. Each time we recall something, we reshape it. We exaggerate, simplify, reinterpret. At the social level, this effect magnifies. Nations remember selectively to foster unity, heroes are elevated while flaws are erased, traumas are reframed into myths of resilience. The messy truth, the warning signs, the complicity, the banal decisions that led to catastrophe fades into silence. And so, when the same warning signs appear again, they are met not with alarm, but with denial. Consider the Great Depression of 1929. Reckless speculation, weak regulation, widening inequality, the collapse devastated millions. Economists vowed reforms to prevent such disasters. And yet, within a few decades, deregulation crept back, speculative bubbles inflated again, and by 2008, the world plunged into another crisis of greed and short-sightedness. Banks collapsed, families lost homes, governments scrambled to stabilize markets. Never again became, here we go again. Surveys taken after the 2008 crash revealed that many young people barely knew the lessons of 1929. History had been taught as distant and irrelevant, while financial myths of endless growth dominated cultural imagination. Collective amnesia also thrives in the face of environmental warnings. In the 1970s, scientists already cautioned about carbon emissions and climate change. Leaders met, promises were made, awareness campaigns spread, but urgency faded. Fossil fuel interests muddied the conversation, public attention shifted, and the collective memory of warnings was replaced by new distractions. Now, decades later, the crisis has intensified. Glaciers melt, wildfires rage, seas rise, and yet still, some insist the danger is exaggerated, echoing the same dismissals heard 50 years ago. Climate change is perhaps the clearest case of collective amnesia in action, a willful forgetting of what we already know, because remembering demands sacrifice. Philosophy gives us another lens. Nietzsche spoke of the eternal recurrence, the idea that existence is a cycle of repetition. Santayana famously warned, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." But the problem is not only that we forget it, is that we remember wrongly. Myths replace facts. Ideology reshapes events. The American Civil War, for example, is remembered in some communities not as a fight over slavery, but as a noble defense of heritage. Such distortions prevent societies from truly learning, because the real lesson has been erased. Collective amnesia is fueled by biases deeply rooted in human psychology. One is optimism bias, the belief that this time will be different. Leaders assure their people that unlike the empires of the past, their empire will endure. Unlike past financial bubbles, this market is safe. Unlike past wars, this war will be quick and decisive. Optimism bias blinds us to historical parallels. Another is the outgroup bias. We tell ourselves that past mistakes were caused by them, corrupt leaders, foolish masses, foreign aggressors, but not by us. By externalizing blame, societies protect their self-image but fail to internalize the warning. Media and culture play their role as well. Stories simplify complexity. Hollywood retells wars with clear heroes and villains, glossing over the ambiguous choices and systemic failures that truly drove catastrophe. National myths celebrate triumph while burying shame. Over time, these cultural filters act like erasers. What remains are stories of glory, not caution. And so, young generations inherit not the hard lessons of failure, but romanticized versions that invite repetition. Social identity theory helps explain why societies cling to distorted memories. Groups derive pride and cohesion from shared narratives. To admit past mistakes threatens the group's dignity. So, nations prefer stories of victory, resilience, and righteousness, even if it means obscuring truth. This isn't limited to nations. Corporations downplay past scandals, communities forget injustices they once tolerated, religious groups reinterpret uncomfortable histories. Everywhere, remembering selectively becomes a tool for survival but also a recipe for repeating mistakes. Take authoritarianism. After World War II, fascism was widely condemned. Yet within decades, new forms of authoritarian populism arose. Leaders with simple slogans, promising restoration of greatness, gained power by stoking fear and resentment. Many citizens, no longer remembering the gradual descent into dictatorship, saw nothing alarming. A 2018 Pew Research survey found that in several countries, younger generations were less committed to democracy than older ones, often taking freedom for granted. The fading memory of what dictatorship truly means created fertile soil for its return. Economics shows similar cycles. Economists Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff studied centuries of financial crises and concluded that despite different contexts, the same mistakes recur: debt overreach, speculation, political complacency. Each crisis is followed by reforms and promises, but collective amnesia ensures those reforms erode with time. By the next generation, the warnings are forgotten, and the cycle repeats. Even pandemics follow this rhythm. The Spanish flu of 1918 killed millions, yet by the 1920s it was largely absent from public discourse, overshadowed by the Roaring Twenties. Only when COVID-19 struck a century later did the parallels resurface: delayed responses, misinformation, public resistance to restrictions. The lessons were there, but buried. And so the world stumbled through familiar mistakes. Why does collective amnesia persist even when evidence is available? One reason is the overwhelming pace of change. Modern societies drown in information. Events pile up so quickly that attention moves on before lessons are absorbed. Another reason is denial as a coping mechanism. Psychologists note that humans avoid painful truths when they threaten identity or comfort. Admitting that climate change is catastrophic or that democracy is fragile is terrifying. Forgetting is easier. There is also the problem of time horizons. Politicians think in election cycles, corporations in quarterly earnings, individuals in personal lifetimes. History unfolds across decades, but decision-making is driven by short-term incentives. As memories fade and incentives shift, old mistakes reappear dressed in new clothes. So, can humanity ever break free of this cycle? The evidence is mixed. There are cases where lessons were learned. Nuclear war, for example, has been avoided since 1945, arguably because the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remains vivid in global consciousness. International institutions like the UN and treaties on arms control emerged as attempts to institutionalize memory. Similarly, Civil rights movements carried forward lessons from past struggles, achieving real, though incomplete, progress. These examples suggest that memory can endure when it is actively cultivated, institutionalized, and passed down with integrity. But even here, vigilance wanes. Nuclear dangers are resurfacing as treaties erode. Civil rights gains face backlash as societies forget the costs of injustice. Memory, even institutionalized, requires renewal. Ultimately, collective amnesia may be part of the human condition. Just as individuals forget pain to heal, societies forget trauma to move forward. But healing without remembering leaves scars vulnerable to reopening. History repeats not because we learn nothing, but because we learn selectively, too little, too late. As we stand amid climate change, technological disruption, and political instability, the urgency of memory has never been greater. Will we remember the warnings of past collapses or convince ourselves that this time is different? Will we listen to the echoes of history or let them fade into silence once again? The philosopher George Santayana's warning still rings true, but perhaps it needs updating. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, but those who remember only selectively are condemned to repeat it with new illusions. So, as we look forward, the question remains, are we capable of breaking the cycle of collective amnesia, or is repetition simply woven into the rhythm of humanity? In the end, perhaps wisdom lies not in the certainty that we have learned, but in the humility to remain vigilant, to recognize how easily memory fades, and to resist the comfort of forgetting. Because history is always whispering to us, always offering its hard-earned lessons. The tragedy is not that the whispers go unheard, but that too often we choose not to listen.